Welcome to the Sports Entrepreneurs Podcast. I'm your host, Marcus Luer, and I'm excited to get into another great series of stories from a true veteran in our industry. Having today on the call, all the way from Newport Beach, California, Mr. Craig Thompson. Welcome to the podcast, Craig.
Thanks, Marcus. Nice to be here.
Yes, looking forward to getting deep into your amazing stories. I just had Andrew Craig, the Craig on the other side of the name, on it. We just dropped him yesterday, and of course there is some overlap in your times together in ISL, and again, similar, equally incredible stories there. So I'm excited to dig deeper into the amazing things you've done. And as we always start, we always want to sort of, get to know a little bit the guest on the other side. So I do just a quick sort of rundown of your career, and then we'll dive straight back into the front. So you did start with ISL as well, and we're going to hear later how someone from California lands in Switzerland. There's I think a good story to that. A big part, and clearly, many people will know you from, is your time at Team as one of the founding members there. And that's clearly something we're going to dive deep into. You've been having your own agency for many years as well, called Mindspring, and started, again, a few other businesses on the back of it, which we'll dive into. There is an America's Cup to talk about, which, again, amazing event anyone will recognize, and we'll have a bit more story on that. And then, of course, we'll come back to Mindspring and Mindspring Capital now. So but before we get there to the finish line, we'll come back to all the way to the frontier. California, somewhat in the, mid-'80s. Tell us, how did it all start?
Well, I was a volleyball player in my college career and professional beach player for many years. And I was asked to work in the '84 Olympic Games in Los Angeles.
Okay.
And
awesome.
It was a great experience. USA men got the gold, USA women got the silver. It was a fantastic event.
Did you play? You were not on the Olympic team, I guess.
No. I was active retired a few years before that.
Got it.
Southern California was hopping, and it was a really fun time. The president of the International Volleyball Federation, Ruben Acosta, asked me as the games were closing if I would be interested in moving to Switzerland and being the technical director of the FIVB.
Right.
And I talked to my wife and got a nod that sounded like a lot of fun, and we agreed to go for 1 year and experience Europe. We'd never really been out of the States much before, and so we packed up and moved to Switzerland.
There we go. Yeah, and then as you mentioned earlier, that 25 years later, you were still there, so to speak, right? Which is amazing. Now. So you end up in Switzerland with FIB, the Volleyball Federation. So how do you connect them into the ISL world? Was ISL a partner was the federation?
Well, yeah, funny enough, ISL was actually the marketing agency of the FIVB when I was there as technical director. So I had the chance to meet a few of the executives. I met Horst Dossler at the time, and was very impressed by him. And then an amazing thing happened, Marcus, that kind of changed my life, really. I'd been working there for about 6 months, and I really hadn't had a lot of jobs. I'd been a professional volleyball player, and this was kind of my first job, really. But the president of the federation, he lied to me about. I actually don't forget even what it was about now, but he lied to me, and I came home and told my wife, and it was something serious and really upset me. And I said, well, look, maybe there's a misunderstanding. Things can happen. I'm going to give him another chance. And 4 months later, my wife and I had planned a vacation that we had been looking forward to in Europe ever since we got there.
Right.
And about a week before, he said, oh, no, I never approved that vacation. You're not going. And I went back to my desk and got my keys and got my stuff and went back to his office and looked him in the eye and said, I'm done. I quit. You're a liar. I'm not going to work for you anymore. And I just dropped my keys on his desk and walked out.
Wow.
Probably not the smartest thing I've ever done in my life.
Okay. How old were you at that time? Just to give us a sense here.
I was 36, 35, 36.
Okay. All right. Okay.
So But then my wife and I kind of said, well, we actually like it here. Maybe I could find another job and do something else here. And so I went to the Office of Unemployment in Lausanne.
Wow.
And they said, well, Mr. Thompson, did you quit or were you fired? And I said, no, I quit. And they said, well, look, we're really sorry, but if you quit, we won't be able to extend your work permit, and basically you have to go back to your country. And I said, oh, wow, that's not what I was anticipating. I turned around to leave the office, and this Swiss guy said, just as I was leaving the door, he said, Mr. Thompson, come back. And I turned around and went to he said, tell me, why did you quit? And I said, well, I quit because the president of the federation lied to me twice, and I just didn't want to work for someone like that. Yeah. And he said, really? And the Swiss, very, very straight, very honest. And he said, well, can you prove it? And I said, well, I don't know if I can prove it, but I can tell you what happened. Right. He said, okay, good. He said, you take this dossier and fill it out for me. Tell me the story. You have 3 weeks. Bring it back, and we'll look into it. And in the meantime, we'll take care of you.
Wow.
And so I said, okay, fantastic. And I left the office thinking, fat chance on this. But I brought it back, and he then took another few weeks to look into it. I brought Dr. Acosta into the office to interview him, which, of course, infuriated him.
Oh, yeah.
And
yes, I can imagine.
And funny enough, when that happened, he was so angry with me, saying that I'd been lied to and telling this to the unemployment office. He was so angry with me that he sent out in those days, a telefax to the world, all the federations in the world, telling them all that he had fired me,
right,
which was a third lie, and that I was persona non grata, never to work in the sport again, right. And he thought that would be the end of me. And they brought me back in, and they said, look, we've looked into this. We now see this fax that he sent out that he fired you. We know he didn't fire you. Right. So we're gonna let you stay in Switzerland and find another job.
Right.
And so that was the beginning of 25 years.
Yeah, amazing. And so did that fax land on ISL's desk, and they went, hey, okay, fine, come over here, or how did you then connect with the ISL world?
That's a good story, because I went after the FIVB. I actually went to the FEI, the International Equestrian Federation, where I worked for Princess Anne, was our president, from Great Britain. And then I finally found my way to ISL. And when I first got to ISL, my boss at ISL was a guy named Peter Sprogus. I'm sure you know.
Yes.
And I was sitting in his office one night, and we got the phone rings, and it's Mrs. Acosta. And she said, Peter, and I was in the office, she didn't know it. He put her on speakerphone, and she said, Peter, we understand you've hired Craig Thompson. He tried to ruin the FIVB. You must fire him immediately. And I'm listening to this, and Peter said, oh, thank you very much, Mrs. Acosta. Thank you. Anything else? Okay, thank you. Goodbye. And he just, hung up on her, basically. And he looked at me and he said, if I was you, I'd hire an attorney. And which I never did, and I never heard from them again, and everything was fine.
Right. Okay. Wow. So you had a bit of a rocky start there into the industry, from the sound of it.
Well, it was a rocky start, but on the other hand, the power of honesty, the Swiss people, and telling an honest story and have it being accepted for what it is, and then verified, that taught me a lot about the world right there. Right. I never expected that I would be listened to, and I would be upheld with my story. So that was quite a lesson.
That's interesting. So you came into ISL through FIE, which is the Equestrian Federation, and I believe from what I see in your CV, you also then spent time on the IWF program, right? So you weren't necessarily involved in the football and other things, or how would you describe your role at ISL at that time?
Yeah, we were all compartmentalized. Andrew Craig had the Olympics and so on. Peter had athletics. I was with Peter in athletics, and so our client was the IAAF at the time. Now it's World Athletics, of course. Yeah. But and it was Primo Nebbiolo, and it was a great learning experience. Peter was my guru on teaching me the business, and I'll forever be grateful for him for that. So I was in the athletics group department, and And then eventually, I was able to bring the FEI as a client to ISL just before I left in 1991.
Right.
I was able to bring them, and then I was the vice president in charge of FEI at that time.
Now, I've had a couple of folks from ISL on it, which you know from Dominic to obviously Andrew very recently, and a few others. And it's always the sort of amazing stories of how that agency obviously started, and Horst Dassler, his name of course comes up there. And did you have any sort of experience with him directly as well, or where were you sort of in the overall picture of the company there?
Well, when I was at the FIVB, I think I mentioned we were in Paris for an event, and Horst Dassler was there, and we had this one of these dinners, one of these evenings that you just never forget in your entire life. It was in the Bois de Boulogne, and beautiful restaurant, and Mr. and Mrs. Acosta, Horst Dassler, and I were at the five of us at the table, and I just was able to. We had enough time. I was able to ask him about his life and his experiences, and I just fell in love with the man. He was absolutely the most charming, intelligent, and he was together with Mark McCormick, really the two pioneers that started the sports marketing industry, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, I think Mark is obviously well recognized as sort of one of those clear founding fathers, and he has books out and also stuff. And unfortunately, Horst died, much too young. And so I don't know, how much the younger generation really recognizes him as that sort of true leader. Yeah. But every time I speak to anyone, of course, who worked at ISL, he gets that credit for being this sort of genius and bringing these programs together in FIFA, etc. I mean, you have so when it comes to the ISL part, obviously there's two other gentlemen which we need to start mentioning, and that's Jürgen Lenz and Klaus Hempel, because you started to do some very significant work with them fairly shortly after that. I guess you were already working with them at that time at ISL as well, and then it led to the team part, or how was it sort of the transition there from that?
Yeah, exactly, Marcus. So in 91, Horst Dassler developed a brain tumor and passed away rather quickly. And he had five sisters, 4 or 5, and none of them wanted to take on his role as chairman of ISL. But one of the sisters' husbands did, a guy named Christoph Malms.
Yes.
And he came in late 91, and we could see right away he was from outside the industry, and he didn't really know the sports world. It was an ambitious move by him, right. But we kind of quickly realized that ISL wasn't going to be the same anymore, even though Klaus and Jürgen were still president and vice president. Right. So and then surprisingly, without my knowledge, Klaus and Jürgen decided to quit. They said we're leaving. And Can you imagine being the president of ISL with the World Cup, the Olympic Games, the European Championships, international basketball, international athletics, Equestrian Federation, just turning your back and walking away? And they literally walked away to nothing. Wow. They started a new agency. They called it Team Marketing. Yep. And they spent several months kind of brainstorming what they were going to do. And they picked up the International Triathlon Union, which was not anything in comparison to the events that they'd had. And also they picked up ATP Senior Tennis, another one which was far away from what they'd been doing. Yeah. And I, myself, Tom Liston, Thomas Klotz, Bernard de Roos, were asked by Klaus and Jürgen to join them. And I have to say, for me, seeing the handwriting on the wall with this new chairman coming in and lots of changes taking place in ISL, and then this big news that Klaus and Jürgen were leaving, it was for me, even though that was like my dream job being at ISL, it was almost, I didn't even think about it. When they asked me if I would join them, I just said immediately yes. Right. And I quickly decided to leave.
Yeah. So when they set up Team, it wasn't UEFA wasn't right there knocking on the door. I guess that came a bit later then, right? Okay. So talk me through that a bit. How do you go from I guess the ones you just mentioned to starting a Champions League? How does that start? How does that work?
Well, during the days of ISL, naturally Klaus and Jürgen developed a quite good relationship with Lennart Johansson and Gerd Eigner, the the president and general secretary of UEFA.
Well, and
So-
ISL had UEFA rights as well, right? If I remember correct, Andrew mentioned something about there was some joint package, I can't remember the name of it, which you guys had developed, right? Which was sort of a FIFA and UEFA sort of combo of rights, right?
That's I don't even remember the name of that package, but he's absolutely right.
Yeah.
But part of the package was the World Cup, part of the package was the European Championships,
Correct.
and also a part of the package was the Champions Club Cup final match.
Right. Okay.
And so, but as you said, when Klaus and Jürgen started, they just had the ITU and the ATP, and no idea of anything happening at UEFA. And so this really came out of the blue. I mean, happily so, obviously, and the timing was just incredible.
Yeah.
And we had to tender for that project, and interestingly, which nobody really knows these days, when we started the Champions League, so we had to raise, we had to complete the tender documents and all that, but we had to raise 200 million Swiss francs.
Right.
And UEFA didn't put in one penny, not one penny.
Okay.
And it was rather shocking because it was a wealthy federation, but part of their deal was that we had to raise the money, and so Klaus and Jürgen led that with some German industrialists and raised the money, and the money was necessary because all the teams that were in the Champions Club Cup in those days, they all had their own broadcast and sponsorship rights, and in order to have a centralized marketing program, we had to buy out or provide enough prize money that they wouldn't lose money participating in the Champions League. And in order to do that, we had to raise that 200 million.
Got it, and that makes sense. I mean, that's it's a bit like what has happened now with CA11, right? How when they bought out the other half of it. So that start was similar in a sense, and that's really interesting. So from what I hear, and I remember hearing that before, is that one of the parts which I guess maybe one of the reasons you guys won. I mean, first of all, clearly you had an amazing leadership team there, no doubt. But that it also was the approach was that as an agency you would only do Champions League, right? You wouldn't do what ISL did, where have multiple other sports and serve as many federations. No. It was sort of this is it. We're going to be just your agent, right? Is that correct?
Yes and no.
Okay.
UEFA didn't put any restrictions on us at all.
Right.
It was ourselves that said, this is going to be so big, and it has so much potential that we better give it our full attention.
Correct. Yeah, that's right. I think that was part of your pitch, I guess, right?
Later, UEFA said, you will now do nothing else except Champions League if you keep the Champions League.
Got it.
Right. Kind of a two-pronged deal.
Yeah.
So we voluntarily gave up the ITU and the ATP senior tennis projects so we could fully focus on Champions League.
Okay, that makes
sense.
Which
we started in February of 1992. We had the contract.
Right.
Our first matches were in November. So, 10 months to start the Champions League. It was a bit of pressure.
Yeah, amazing. So again, let's get into this. The stories of how it came about. Because as much as you the experiences the team had from running FIFA and stuff, that was club tournaments, right? Major national team tournaments, right? The World Cup, etc. It wasn't club football. So there is a different dynamics and many other things. So. How was it structured, and what was the sort of aha moments you had during those early days?
Well, something very unusual happened, Marcus. Right at the beginning, we got the project. Klaus and Jürgen went to meet with Leonard Johansson and Gerd Eigner, and they informed Klaus and Jürgen that at the time, now this is 1992. UEFA was in Bern, in a small office, didn't have a lot of staff. And they said, guys, we are so busy with what we have on our plate, and you guys are a group of professionals. We want you to just build this and run with it. We don't want to be very involved. Anything that has to do with the sport, the competition format, the pitch, I mean, that's stuff you have to get approved with us. But everything else, you're on your own. And that's something, this. I mean, federations don't do that. They want to be in control. They want to tell you what to do. They want to approve everything.
Yeah.
So with the time scale that we had, 10 months, and or it was 8 months. Sorry, 8 months.
Wow.
And the enormity of this task. I mean, that was the best thing that ever could have happened to us, and it is actually probably the most important reason that we were able to get the Champions League right in that short period of time, and it's been able to go on to such success was because that we were left alone to get on with it.
Right.
And don't get me wrong, UEFA was a good partner with us. We did have contact with them. We had to get a lot of things approved on the sporting side and so on. But we wrote the rules of engagement for the clubs, and we wrote the broadcaster manuals and the sponsor manuals and the brand manuals, and we basically organized the competition and got all the commercial rights lined up so that we could deliver it. And it was but because we could do it like that with a group of professionals, just working hard, our noses down, we were able to get it, off to a good start. But then, we had to put together a commercial concept, obviously, that was going to lead to the success. And this is where probably it was one of those little pockets of innovation in the history of sports marketing. I think the Champions League kind of speaks for itself now, and I think it's okay to say that.
Absolutely.
This was a really unique moment in the history of sports. And again, we were UEFA gave us their confidence, and they said, guys, get on with it. And so we were able to think freely and to think big and to really go for it. Okay. So some of the things that we did that were really key. And so we decided we were going to play midweek. Okay. Because we didn't want the competition of the other games, which normally take place on the weekends with the national leagues. So we said midweek. Nobody had played midweek football before.
All right.
So we went on Wednesday nights.
So the previous cup competitions, when were they hosted? I have to admit, I can't remember that far back. So when what was the UEFA Cup? I guess the front runner before that. When these matches were played, also midweek.
On weekends.
They were also weekends. Oh, so they would be overlapping.
This was a total departure to play midweek, and we didn't just depart to play midweek on Wednesday nights. So we had, we started with 8 teams, as you remember, which was 2 groups of 4, which meant 4 matches, every league match night. And but we said every match is going to start at the same time. Right. 8:30 is going to be Champions League kickoff time. So if we had a team in Moscow, they would have to start their match at 10:30 at night in order to beat the CET 8:30.
Right. Okay.
The Russians were not happy about that, but
yes, okay.
But the genius of that, in those days, remember, we weren't having computers and mobile phones, and and television schedules were printed in the newspaper or sent to your house. So we wanted it to be dead simple. Anybody that wanted to see the best football in Europe, was going to tune in on 8:30 on Wednesday night, and there it was.
Appointment TV. Yeah, I like that. Nice.
And that brought us big audiences right from the start. And then, we went out. In those days, everything was EBU, and we went out and said, no. We were going to go country by country. We're going to negotiate with each the main broadcasters in each country. So we had TF1, we had ITV, we had RTL, TVE in Spain. But this was something that was really, really bold of us. We said, look. This football, which is the best teams in the world playing against each other, every 2-3 weeks, it's absolutely must-have television for the major broadcasters in Europe. Yep. And so, knowing that, it put us in a position of strength that many other agencies would not have realized that. So, the first thing we did is we said, look, you want the rights to the Champions League? You're going to have to provide us with broadcast sponsorship free of charge, which means every program with an opening sequence with MasterCard and Ford or Heineken and Adidas, every single match is going to be brought to you by 2 of our 6 sponsors. And not only that, they will have identification at every break.
So you had your own branding in the opening sequences, right?
in the opening sequences, but also every break. So just before the match, you'd have a couple spots.
Right.
There'd be the MasterCard and Heineken logo before the match, and then so all the way
the ad inventory as well. Got it.
And then the other, but that was super sick. Nobody was doing that in those days. It was being done in America, but not in Europe.
Right.
And so our sponsorship package already included, this major exposure on television.
Right.
And these were not just a logo. It was an animated logo. They got some seconds on television. So, but we coupled that with one of the things that really didn't work. There's always things that don't work when you start a project, because we had a couple things that didn't work. One of them was with the broadcasters. We said, we're not only going to give you program sponsorship, but we're going to give you 2 commercial spots in every match.
Right.
And the funny thing was, we were ahead of our time. The MasterCards and even though big companies, Fords, our sponsors, they all were represented by big ad agencies, and the ad agencies were saying, no, we buy a program of advertising. We don't just want these free spots. We don't know what to do with them. It doesn't fit into our program. Right. It's really funny when you think about it that they actually weren't interested in the 30-second spots. So that worked for a couple years, but it never really got the buy-in that we expected.
Right.
And then the other thing that really did work was, and again, a bold move. We made every broadcaster after the live match was over. So every broadcaster had to show a live match at 8:30, and then they were given a half hour for a studio program after the match, and then they had a 45-minute window to show the highlights of the other three matches.
Right, got it.
So we had to have production and then satellite links all over Europe to bring the highlights of all the matches back to the broadcast, so they could. So this was a really quick turnaround, a kind of hot edit situation. But one of the really fun things from that was that I remember I was selling the television rights to Spanish television, and we were talking about the main clubs in Spain. Obviously, you got Real Madrid and Barcelona, and I was asking them, who's got the most popularity outside of those two clubs, and they said Manchester United. And I said, what? I said, that's not even a Spanish club. And they said, no, but Manchester United is always in the Champions League, and our Spanish audience has just adopted them as their third favorite team.
Right, okay.
So, and that was strictly because of the highlights. So the highlights really brought the competition to life. It wasn't just the live match. It was all the other great teams were playing.
You could see the rest. Yeah. And if you think of it, today's world where really highlights is becoming so much more important, right? Less people are watching full matches in any sport, not just football. We're talking something, 20 years ago. So it's interesting. Now I have two questions sort of keep popping in my head here. Number one is, of course, what exactly, you were, founding managing director. But how did you guys split up roles? One did television, the other one production, the other one sponsorship, or everyone does everything? Or how do you guys organize yourself there?
Look, I'm really glad you asked me that because this is another thing that the team did that was just amazing. And this was Klaus and Jürgen. We'd all just come from ISL, okay? Yeah. And our experience at ISL, where we had Andrew Craig and Peter Sprogus and Paul Smith and, Stephen Dixon, these guys were really good at what they did. But what they did was sell sponsorship, okay? That was their primary role. But that was the revenue that we lived on. Yeah. And what happened over the years was that these guys that were selling the sponsorship, they kind of became gods, within the company. And the idea of them ever going and doing event management or paying attention to other things, is like, no, that's below us. That's operational.
They're sales guys. Yep.
Yeah. And so we decided, Klaus and Jürgen decided at the very beginning, they said, you guys, we're not going to do that. We're not going to repeat that mistake. You guys are equal. You're all equal. You're all the same. And we want this. We call this company team marketing for a reason, because we are a team. So Craig, you're going to have operations, but you're also going to sell broadcast rights, and you're also going to run our licensing program, and you're going to be in charge of the brand. Tom Liston, you're going to sell sponsorship and you're going to sell TV rights. Bernard DeRose, the same. Thomas Klotz was our attorney. But because I was the oldest of the guys, and Klaus and Jürgen said, look, we're gonna have all these guys report to you for operations, and every one of them is going to have to manage events in addition to their other responsibilities. So you can see what that, you know, this business, Marcus, you can see, you know, when you're a commercial salesman and your shit doesn't stink, and you're just living on top of the world, the last thing you're going to do is go out and get your hands dirty and run a match and tell people how to do things. But when you don't do that, you don't really appreciate and realize, you know, everything that you're selling to that client and how everything has to be delivered in order for the whole thing to work. So I had the unenviable task of taking these guys, Liston and Bernard, these hotshot sales guys, and teaching them how to run events, which they certainly had experience with that. But, you know, we created an entirely new system at Team Marketing around event management, which became a cornerstone of the company because we did it in a way that hadn't been done before. But so they, you know, I would assign their venues. I developed a whole procedures with checklists, all the meeting agendas, you know, the operations manual, the club manual. They had to learn this stuff. They had to know it. They had to go out with one assistant, what we called an assistant venue manager. They were a venue manager, an assistant venue manager. They had to go out and run this match.
Yeah, I like it, and I totally agree. I mean, and I would say, looking back, my years, 20 years, 25 years was building my own business. That's what I've done too. Not just personally that I go in there and do it, but also like you said, I always feel that the guys who sold it need to be somewhat involved in the delivery. You don't want to take them completely away from the selling, because that's not really smart either. But if they don't understand and what it takes to make it happen, they don't learn, right? And I do believe them learning how to, what happens behind the scene makes them better salespeople too. That has always been my belief, and maybe that's sort of what you guys were doing as well in this sense, right?
Oh, exactly. That's very smart. And so they would come back from their match day, and I would run a debriefing, and they're making mistakes. They had to make a report on what went well, what didn't go well at their venue, and they're making mistakes, and I'm calling them out. And they weren't real happy about that. But we were able to blend it all together, and in the end, we did create a team of people working together to do what was right for Champions League.
I love this. Yeah, and like I said, and I know it myself. When you in the trenches, and the stories you have when you then sell are completely different, right? You're not selling a deck; you are selling the stories because you've been there. And to me, that is hugely important. And I'm certain that is exactly what you guys saw and happened there. And that's cool. Yeah. Exactly. I had Patrick Murphy on it, who obviously was one of your sales guys, right? I'm assuming he was there during a similar time where you were there. And there's some great stories on that. Now, one other obvious one I wanted to ask earlier already was, the big teams, the Barcelonas and Man Uniteds and maybe Bayern Munichs of the world. How did they react when you guys rocked up there and said, "Hey, we're going to do this Champions League thing now"? Was all like, "Hey, fantastic! Here's my rights or my contracts. Just you take them over." Or my assumption is there weren't always that ready to hand it over. And they're a little cake there, right?
You're exactly right. I mean that was the dicey time when things could have gone belly up. Luckily. Because Klaus and Jürgen had been doing the European Championships for UEFA for years, they had this relationship of trust, with UEFA. And UEFA, when they approved the regulations for being in the Champions League, they made it very clear that team marketing's role was this, and this, and you had to listen and do what they said.
Right.
And so we really had a strong support of authority from UEFA. But with that said, it came down. We had all of our teams on board, and Olympique Marseille, Bernard Tapie. I don't know if you remember the name, but
yes,
he was the mayor of Marseille, also the owner of Olympique Marseille, and a very flamboyant character. And he just said, "Bullshit. We don't buy it. We'll make more money the old way." So
correct.
I'll never. We had to. Klaus Jürgen and I and Gerhard Eigner went down to Olympique Marseille one afternoon. We started with dinner. We finished at 3 a.m, the negotiation, and it was like pulling teeth. But we finally got there, and I have to say, to their credit, even though they were the most difficult team to onboard by far, once they got in, they followed everything perfectly to a T. Great cooperation.
And my assumption is that, again, you'll always have someone who sees it and buys into it quickly, whichever team that maybe was. And if it's a big enough team, then the others sort of kind of follow a bit along as well, right? I mean, in the larger scheme of things, Olympique Marseille isn't such a big team, right? I mean, you could run the Champions League without them, no.
Well, in those days, they were a big team.
They were, okay. Yeah, they were bigger than they are now. True, fair enough.
L'OM was the big team in France at the time. But look, you're right, though. I mean, we had, when you get an AC Milan on board and, teams like that. But, also in the first year of the Champions League, we didn't have teams from 3 of the major markets. We didn't have a German team, an English team, or a Spanish team.
Really? Imagine wow. That. Okay. I did not realize
that. We had sold the rights to those broadcasters, assuming they're going to have a team in the competition because, of course, Real Madrid or Barcelona is going to qualify. But our luck was so bad. We didn't have a Spanish team, a German team, or an English team.
How did and the reason is these teams just didn't want to participate.
They had to keep winning to get in the final 8. So they were still playing in the Champions Club Cup to qualify, for the Champions League, and they had to keep winning to get in the final 8, and they lost, and so. We ended up with FC Bruges from Belgium, and we had Porto, which was a good team, but not a Bayern
Munich. Drive the ratings, for sure. Okay, so, I didn't realize that. So the teams had just didn't make it through to the final 8. That was the problem. It was less about that the countries or the teams who didn't want to participate. They didn't. No. Nobody
participated. They just didn't make it.
Okay, got it. Okay. So how did you then fix that? Because what I remember now, how many teams are now in the championship? It was
32.
32, right? So you start with 8, so then it became 16, and then obviously up. So by broadening it, I guess the chances that these big teams are finally getting there, and you have what you need is, I'm sure, was all part of it, right? How did that sort of talk us through that a little bit, the expansion and then the growth of it?
Well, starting the Champions League and you never really know what's going to happen. We really didn't talk at all about ever being more than 8 teams.
Okay.
But the first season went well. We were able to cover with commercial revenue the money that we had raised, the investment money that we had raised, and wash our face. Second year, we started to make money.
Right.
And so. And it was just going well. It just made sense. At that time, you have to remember, at that time in Europe, there was no leagues. There was no football leagues except for the National League, but there was no European leagues. It was all knockout competition.
Right.
And when we started the Champions League, the press was totally against us. You can't start a league. This is not America. We don't want to watch the NBA. We want every match. You can't have AC Milan in the Champions League and then they lose a match and they go on to win the final. That's not European. We'll never adopt that. So we had a lot of uphill battle with that. Yeah. But when the stadiums were completely packed and the TV ratings on, our rating in England was 30. I mean, we had the biggest audiences of any sporting event. And it was every week that we had the event that we had these kind of audiences. The response from the commercial community was just unprecedented. Yeah. So we soon started talking about going to 16 teams, and a few years later, we made it.
Right. Yeah, no, incredible. And exactly, we could spend pretty much the entire podcast just talking about this. But there are a few other stops we wanted to touch on. And now, so you have 10, 12 years there with team. How do you leave a place like this? With having the fun you're having there. Why would you leave, or what was what was sort of the next step in your career then?
There was no reason to leave. We had a monthly management meeting. The same guys that started the company in 1992 were in that management meeting for 10 years. We had just the most wonderful. Our setup was Marcus. Our setup was, I had operations but anybody that had that had a voice about how the operations was going could speak up. And if everybody agreed, I'd have to change the operations. We were truly a team. And we always walked out of that room, even though we didn't like some of the decisions, we all walked out of that room. We said, everything that happened, we support it. So it was such a pleasure to work there. And I didn't want to leave, and I was making a lot of money. And, but my wife and I in 1991 had bought an old farmhouse in the south of France. Our dream was to live in rural Europe. We'd been looking at Tuscany and Provence, and we ended up in Provence. And along the way at Team, we had 2 children, and my dream and my wife's dream was to live in Provence. And I couldn't live in Provence and work at Team Marketing. Right. And so she said, she came to me one day and she said, if you really want to live in Provence, it's time to go, because our kids are 7 and 4 years old. And if we want to be fair to them, where they have a chance to learn the French language, get into the school system, make friends, we need to go now. And how wives can be with a certain wisdom that men never have. And so I thought long and hard about it. I did not want to quit my job at all. Yeah. But she was right. And, there's more to life than I'd been 11 years. I'd loved it, and I'd made a lot of money. But there's more to life, isn't there? So I just decided to leave, and it wasn't easy, I'll tell you. But then when I left, they actually hired me for 2 more years as a consultant. Right. And then I got tired of that. I was flying back and forth to Switzerland. I finally just left altogether in 2003. Right.
Now a question here, because if I recall this wasn't a contract for life, right? Team had to bid again a few more times, and
every 3 years.
Yeah, I remember. There was obviously the big agencies then started to compete, right? IMGs, etc. Yeah. How did you guys manage to keep the fingers in it? Eventually, I remember UEFA bought a piece of Team, right? And that maybe was obviously then the final trick to it. But that was much later, and I don't recall which year it was. Can you just quickly explain that? How did you guys manage to keep hanging in there? Was, of course, being the agency of record will always give you that advantage, but it doesn't mean that the others aren't throwing crazy money out there and, pumping up the bidding process, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And this goes back to the relationship between Klaus and Jürgen and Johansson and Eigner, and our us as well. But there was just this, from day one of the Champions League, we created the brand, the star ball. We delivered to UEFA in a way that made UEFA look really good. Okay, and remember, it was the UEFA Champions League. It wasn't the Team Champions League. Yep. And they were just gentlemen, and they really appreciated that. And don't get me wrong, every 3 years we had to go and fight like hell to keep our rights. Okay,
right. So we had 3 year cycle, right? Okay,
rebid, but we had such a track record. We had such respect from the broadcasters and the sponsors that it just became a kind of no-brainer for UEFA. Just keep giving it to us, and look how smart that was. I mean, you can never say that somebody else couldn't have done it better than us, but we did it pretty damn well. And at $5 billion a year now, I mean, FIFA was so jealous of the Champions League. The Champions League makes more money than the World Cup.
Correct.
If you count it, because the Champions League is every year. So, it's a really good question how we did keep it, but we managed to keep it all that time.
Yeah. What year was when UEFA then bought into Team? I remember like a 20% stake or something.
It was after I left, so I don't know exactly, but it must have been around 6, 7, something like that. Right.
So that now, unless I'm missing something here, obviously Team is still running it, right? So this is it, right? Now
that's right.
When you were there, and you were obviously one of the founders of it in a sense, was it you had equity in it as well, or how was it structured? Who owned Team in that sense?
We never got any equity in the Champions League, but what we did have was, so we had a commission agreement with UEFA. We worked on a commission, and every 3 years that commission went down.
Okay.
because the revenues were going up and up and up.
Yeah, yeah. But within the company, did you had some equity in team itself, or you were just an employment contract, or how was your structure? You had
we had a share of the
got it. Right, okay.
The director, the managing director group. We had a share of the profits every year.
Right. Okay. Now in terms of, you mentioned earlier, you had an industrialist coming up with the first money. Is it sort of a well-known private equity group or someone, or just someone found the money and it sort of it had the trust?
Two guys really. Aaron Utger. You may have heard of Utger Foods. Mm-hmm. Big business in Germany, and another man named Wolfgang von Ammerungen, who was an industrialist. I mean, he built train lines and built a lot of industry in Russia. And somehow we got Klaus and Jürgen got in touch with these guys, and that's where the money came from.
Wow. I mean, it's just completely random, man. I love that part.
Ahead of time.
Yeah.
And I, if I can tell you one quick story, just to kind of this kind of maybe conclude our Champions League discussion. But so the brand was everything. Klaus and Jürgen both came out of, well, one from McCann Erickson, one from Unilever. The brand, they were brand guys, and so we were steeped in brand from day one. This is going to be the best branded sport product of all time, and I think it is one.
Absolutely. I love the logo. I love the music and the opening sequences there. It look amazing.
Yeah, they've really led the charge for the Champions League. So in terms of the brand delivery, we got this idea. We had the center circle. You remember the center circle and the center board. You have a Champions League. Yep. But the branding was everywhere on the stadium, and we wanted the players to have some branding as well. So we wanted them to wear a patch on their sleeve. So we developed the patch, and it was a star. And I in charge of operations. I had to go out and get all the teams to sew for every match day. They had to literally sew these patches onto the uniforms. Yeah. And so I went to the different clubs, introduced the patch, told them how it worked. And when I got to Ajax Amsterdam, there was a board meeting around the Champions League, and I was there by myself, and I had the patches with me, and I brought them out on the table, and I started passing them around, and I noticed that the room just went completely silent, and nobody would even look at me. It was like, this had never happened to me in my life. There's 20 people in the room. I'm leading a meeting. I don't know if I had some.
What did you say?
Yeah, it said something or something on my face or something, but so it got so awkward that I finally said, look, excuse me, but there's something wrong here. Can you tell me what it is? And I don't know if you remember the Von Praag, the chairman at the time of Ajax, and he said, Craig, he said, we know you're American, and so you probably don't know this, or you may not know this story, but in World War II, under Hitler, the Jews in Holland were forced to wear a star on their sleeve, and that's how they were identified, and that's how they were taken to bad places, and we can never wear a star on our shirts. We would never do it.
Right.
And I'll tell you, it was one of those moments where you kind of want to die, because you're so stupid. And I just looked at them and I said, God, I cannot tell you how sorry I am that I've brought this here to you and asked you to wear this. I cannot believe that we've done this. I'm so sorry. And I can only promise you that we will never ask you to wear a star on your sleeve. And I had to go back with my tail between my legs and quickly we had to redesign the patch to be a star ball. Yeah. So it wasn't just the one star, but that's a great story, because yes, I mean the ball I remember, obviously I would have never seen the other one, but when you were just talking about it, I thought that's exactly where you're going with it already. Being German, I sort of recognize that story. That wow, that's amazing. That's incredible, and it definitely is a good way to start wrapping up our Champions League story. But it leads beautifully into the next one, because you then obviously started a Champions League in hockey. Now, so that is sort of, I'd love to touch a bit on that. Again, was it your idea to say, hey, what we did in football, we can do in ice hockey? It's obviously not field hockey. Or was someone came to you, or how did that sort of happen? Actually, the idea came from a woman that had been working at UEFA named Margrethe van der Stroom, Dutch woman, and her husband was a hockey player and son. She got this idea, why isn't there a Champions League of hockey? And she called me and she came down to visit me in the south of France, and we talked about this, and it made a lot of sense to me, and I was looking for some kind of my next thing at the time, and we decided to launch a hockey league, Champions League. The concept, took it to the IIHF, René Fazel and Horst Lichtner, and they, at the time, they weren't really doing anything in European competition for the clubs. Every national league existed, but they didn't have any they didn't have any European competition. So it made perfect sense. Yeah. And we went out and raised 60 million euros in order to launch this. We had investors for Gazprom, which you've probably heard of. Yeah. And we had MTG, Modern Times Group in Sweden. And then we had a group called Lundin Petroleum that came in and put up the money. Lots of stories behind that. But anyway, we raised the money, and we started in early 2007, and we were able to launch in the fall of 2008. We brought Gazprom eventually came on board as a sponsor. Reebok came on board as a sponsor, and we had the top broadcasters in Europe, the Northern European hockey territories. They came on board. We cleaned it up. We took some lessons from Champions League. In those days, hockey uniforms were just covered with logos, and the ice was covered with logos, and no logo would ever stand out to anybody. Right. So we just cleaned it all up. We went in and redid the ice at our expense. We cleaned up the boards, cleaned up the uniforms. They had to wear new uniforms for Champions Hockey League. Oh, right. Yeah, we really redid the whole thing. I mean, one journalist wrote an article about it and just said, when I saw the first match, I got tears in my eyes. I've never seen hockey look this good in the history.
Nice. So now, where is the league? I have to admit, I'm not such an ice hockey guy. Is the league still around, or what happened with it?
So we had the top 12 teams in Europe. It was Russia, Sweden, Finland, Czech Republic, Germany, Switzerland, Slovakia, and just like Champions League, a Champions League model. And but then the recession hit in 2008, and it killed us.
I see.
It was really devastating. We eventually had to close up shop at the end of 2008, but then in a few years later, the IIHF actually resumed at the request of the clubs. They resumed the Champions Hockey League, and Patrick Yost, one of our team members, actually went and ran that out of Zurich for the IIHF, which was really a nice story, and it's going strong today. So
great. That's still around. That's awesome. Yeah, and these that's what I call it, the Champions League spin-offs or are all over the world. I can tell you from my part of the world here, a few years ago we were working on something for the Southeast Asian region, and it actually was called the Asean Champions League or Champions Cup. Similar concept, right? Taking the best club teams in the region into a competition, which would sort of be outside of what normally the AFC structure is, right? The Asian Football Confederation structure. So the model works, I think, not in different sports, and you can basically copy it in different regions. So clearly, you guys did there. Has little, children all around the world, I'm sure, in some sense, which is great.
Yeah. I agree. It's a great thing.
Yeah. Now we can't stop here before and not covering America's Cup, which clearly is an incredible event there. And you sort of mentioned earlier to me that Larry Ellison, who obviously had Team Oracle there and had won the cup, kind of brought you into this to run it in I believe the race was in San Francisco, right?
That's right.
Give us some of those stories. Again, an amazing event with tons of history behind it.
Yeah, this was a really different chapter in my life, and I didn't know anything about sailing. But in our business, you don't need to know that much about the sports you work in. The principles are more or less the same, and it helps to know about the sport. But so I arrived in San Francisco, came back from Europe, and it was at the time when we were deciding whether because when you win the America's Cup, the oldest sporting event in history, and it goes back to the 1850s, where it was staged in England, and the winner of the cup decides where it's going to go next, and also decides the rules. You know, the regulations for the boats and so on. So we were deciding between Valencia, where it had just been, and Rome and San Francisco. San Francisco was always the kind of favorite because of Larry Ellison. That's his home base, and what a spectacular city and venue. And the races are in the summer where the winds are 50 knots on a flat water because it's protected from the ocean. And oh my God, you couldn't have a more spectacular, dynamic, scary sailing venue. So we brought it to San Francisco, and I had this one particularly memorable meeting at the very beginning. Larry Ellison had hired Russell Coutts to be his skipper, and Russell had won the cup in Valencia, and was now in charge of the boat, for Larry, of the team, Oracle Racing team, and so and he was the guru of sailing. I mean, here's a guy that that knew everything about the sport, had 4 America's Cup victories, more than anyone in history, and really a god in the sport of sailing. Right. And so he was my main contact, and we sat down one day for 1 hour in San Francisco, and we didn't know each other at all. It was the first time we ever met, and we literally put the America's Cup together in 1 hour from scratch. And I say from scratch, you've got the cup and you've got the history and you've got all that, but so it was really interesting, and maybe it wouldn't have even happened if Russell hadn't said to me, Craig, you're a marketing guy, you're a brand guy. Tell me how what we can do with this cup to make it more appealing, give it a broader audience. Right. And I said, well, Russell, first of all, and I didn't know a lot about the America's Cup. I tried to bone up a bit, but I said, Russell, tell me what does the America's Cup mean to the world of sailing? What is it all about? What are its strengths? Right. And he said, well, it's the tradition, the oldest cup, the oldest sporting event. It's this grandeur of these beautiful boats out on the ocean. These very wealthy, very famous team owners and sailors that have been doing this for years. And he got done telling me these characteristics, and I said to him, I said, Russell, I have to tell you, it sounds boring as hell. And he looked at me, and I didn't know if that was going to be my last meeting with him, but he said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, and he did say one other thing. He said, we're considering to bring catamarans in instead of monohulls. Right. So that was kind of in the back of my mind. And I said, well, Russell, if you're trying to appeal to a sport audience, where's the passion? Where's the racing, the close racing, where one boat might win or the other might win? I've seen America's Cup where one boat's out 15 minutes ahead of the other one. Where's the where's the dynamism? Where's the young people? Sailing's an old sport. If you want to appeal to a broad audience, you got to be younger. And where's the sexiness? Where's the danger in this sport? So I said, look, first of all, most importantly, if you agree to race with catamarans, I think that is an absolutely huge statement about the 34th American Cup.
That was the first time ever. They never had used catamarans before.
They had used catamarans in San Diego about like 20 years earlier. Okay. But every other race had been these big monohulls that are slower than shit, with all these old men sitting on the deck with their legs hanging over, their black socks exposed.
I know the picture.
They're trying to, So I said, look, and he said, the catamarans will automatically change sailing because you can't be an old man and sail a catamaran. These guys have got to be 30 to 40 years old and 20 to 40 years old. And they got to be super fit.
Super fit, yeah, you could see that.
And so, and not only that, we could race catamarans in San Francisco Bay. We wouldn't have to go out on the ocean because they don't draft very deep. and we could actually race right next to the beaches in San Francisco Bay. And for the first time in America's Cup history, we could have hundreds of thousands of people on the beach.
Watching. Yeah, cool.
In previous America's Cups, you had to get on a boat or a helicopter to get out and watch the race, right? So, but then, you've got the guys are training every day. It's super physical. It's super dangerous. We lost a sailor from the Swedish team. He died in San Francisco Bay in training.
Oh, wow.
It really was dangerous. And and these boats are flip-flopping over. They're capsized.
That's right.
They're going head over tail. I mean, it's unbelievable. And people are just gasping, they can't believe what they're seeing.
Right.
So all of a sudden we had this super spectacular race, and next to shore, and we put mics on every sailor, so we heard every word they said during every race.
Okay.
Some of which had to be
a lot of bleeping there. I was going to say, yeah.
And we had cameras all over the boats, so we called sailing from the inside out, because instead of just this main camera on a helicopter on a main boat, we were filming it from the boat. So we came up with all these innovations that we thought would bring it to a younger audience, to more larger global broadcast community, and the other thing is that I told him, I said, look, there's one problem we have, Russell, is that as a matter of fact, Larry Ellison, the Oracle founder and CEO, he's a controversial character in San Francisco,
right?
And he's come into the Bay with his big yachts, and because he has a bunch of big luxury yachts, they pollute the harbor. It's a very climate sensitive, liberal, democratic community.
Yes.
And so we've got bad PR, and I think what we need to do is we need to start a foundation called America's Cup Healthy Oceans. And I want to be the chairman of that, or the leader of that. And it's a nonprofit, and we're gonna involve some of the major ocean foundations that are, fighting plastic and climate change and ocean acidity and overfishing and all types of pollution. We're going to involve these people, and we're going to get, every time we have a regatta, an America's Cup event, we're going to stage a climate healthy oceans
makes complete sense.
Symposium. And we're going to get all the big famous sailors off their boats, and they're going to go do a beach cleanup, and we're going to invite the local press and broadcasters to come down and film it and do a story on our actual commitment to this. And we're going to have a really low carbon footprint. And so he said, well, Craig, it makes a lot of sense to me. And I said, Russell, not only that, there's so many corporations in the world that are supporting climate change initiatives and clean oceans. And we can go to them and have them become sponsors, because we're bringing them what they do anyway.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of reason.
I like
but then Marcus, as life is, I took it to Larry Ellison, and I took it to Tom Perkins. I don't know if you know that name, but Tom Perkins was the founder of Kleiner Perkins, the largest in the day, the biggest Silicon Valley VC firm, biggest VC firm in the world. And he was on our board. And I took it to these two guys, and I explained to them how important I thought this was for the image of the America's Cup and our good citizenship in San Francisco, and the ability to find sponsors. And Larry Ellison looked at me and said, Craig, I don't support that kind of crap, and don't ever bring anything like that to me again.
Okay, wow. All right, so that was the end of that one.
Well, in fact, I went ahead and did it anyway.
Okay.
And it became a really important part of our overall program.
Right.
We brought in Puma at $10 million a year because of our Healthy Oceans project. Right. And it was actually quite a big success. And they're still doing it today with the America's Cup.
I love it. Yeah, and I believe even the catamarans are still pretty much what they're using, right? Or did they ever go back to single hull?
They're going to go back to single hull now, because the Kiwis are the contrarians in the world of sailing. Okay. But everybody else has fallen in love with the cats and wants to keep using them, because it's made sailing an exciting spectator sport for the
exactly. I mean, as you said, the speed and the whole spectacle is amazing. It looks incredible on TV, and you know, the whole new technology, of course, which come in where you can see and you track and you, as I said, you experience it in a very different way. So I do believe it has changed, and I have no doubt some of the things you were doing at that time now are still part of the legacy, which is brilliant. I love that. Now, while we coming a bit closer to the finish line here, I want to come back to Mindspring. You know, obviously you've had your own agency over the years there and did, you know, various things, and now you have Mindspring Capital, which is a bit newer, right? I think you started a couple of years ago. And you know, talk us about it. What is it? You know, what you do there, and you know, some of the, you know, it's obviously capital means there's some investment element to it. You know, what exactly is the mission of the company there?
Well, fortunately, this is a much shorter story. And I mentioned just previously Tom Perkins. One day I was having a beer with him, and he said, "Craig," he said, "you're a sports guy." He said, "You ought to go down to the Valley. There's tons of sport technology startups going on." And he said, "By the way, they all have one thing in common." And I said, "What's that?" He said, "They don't know anything about sport." And that was just kind of a throwaway line that just kind of stuck in my head. And I when I was in San Francisco, I did get approached by a few tech companies and that were curious about getting into sport. And he was absolutely right. And even today, now that I've looked at over 600 sport tech companies in the last year and a half, they all have one thing in common, and it's not 100%, of course, but these guys are technologists, and they're building technology to solve problems in sport, but they don't know the business of sport. You and I and other guys like us that have, you know, run leagues and events and worked with federations and had to sell rights and, you know, manage ticketing and fan experience in the stadium, you know, these guys don't know this stuff, okay? But they're developing technology to bring solutions into that space, and they're brilliant, wonderful young people, full of energy and excitement. And I love the space because I'm learning every single day. I'm learning so much. So we said from the beginning, you know, look, luckily I come from a background of Champions League. Champions League was different. It wasn't what everybody else did, and I've tried to do those kind of things in my life and lead that kind of a life. And I want to do the same thing in the investment world. And so we spent the first year, we put together a team of people from Tokyo to Tel Aviv to Berlin to Stockholm to a couple of us in America, investors and sports guys. And we said, look, we may not be the best investors in the world, but we'll learn that and we'll get good at that. But what we do know is sport. And so we're going to talk to sport early stage. We're going to focus on early stage where the company is in development, where we can really help them. And our approach is we're going to be an advisor first, and they're going to pay us to be an advisor to them. And we're going to help them to build their technology in a smart way for the world of sport. We're going to help them with their go-to-market strategy, with their you know, do they go to football? Do they go to cricket? Do they go to rugby? Do they go to Latin America, Europe, Asia? What level do they go to? Real Madrid, or do they go to you know to Sevilla? What kind of targets? And then we're going to introduce them to the clients in the world that will buy their technology, because we have a pretty big network now of sports rights holders that buy technology. And with our knowledge and introduction ability. We're then going to invest in the company at the same time. What's happening here? We as an investor, we have a vested interest in the success of that company, and we're going to actually be able to work with them very closely, like a partner. It's their company. We're not telling them what to do. We're advising them, but that advice is very valuable. So we've now started to develop a string of investments that we've made and are making, where we are an active advisor, and this is really, really working. And nobody else in the industry is really doing this at the level that we are. I mean, we're spending, you know, hours every week with each of our companies, and really getting into bed with them. And we have senior people on our side that have built companies and, you know, have managed people and hired CEOs and CFOs, and we've been around the block. So we can help these guys, and we've got an expert in betting. We have an expert in broadcast technology.
Nice.
We've got experts in video streaming. So this is our start. We're walking before we start. We're crawling before we start walking. Eventually, I think we'll be one of the bigger investment firms in sport. That's all we want to do in the world. But first of all, right now, what we're doing is we're just proving that we can do early stage tech investments successfully, and then we'll go from there.
Like it. Yeah, it's I'm almost on a similar path. I'm doing some work with a couple of startups here in Asia in the mentoring, and similar investment opportunities are there. So just to get a sense here.
We should talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll continue the discussion offline here. Now, in terms of your own, can you give a bit of the scale and size? What's the investment levels you're taking? What equity stakes are you looking for? Just, is there a framework to it, or?
Yeah, no, definitely. We're early stage, which means, from once the product is developed, even pre-product in some cases, we'll go very early if we really believe in the team. Right. We're up through Series A, even Series B.
Okay.
We're business to business, B2B focused. We're very much concerned about the team. We always look very closely at the team of people. That's by far the most important element. Absolutely. Technology is really second. And what is the fit between our experience, like in the area of sport performance, for example, where you're predicting injuries or tracking player performance on the pitch, that's not a commercial guy that's buying that product, right? Yeah. That's a sport performance guy or a coach, so we're not really focused on that. We're in esports, we're in video streaming, we're in betting, we're in fan engagement, data collection, fan data. So we're focused on those areas where we know what we're talking about. Yeah. And did I answer your question?
Yeah. No. Okay. The part about in terms of the sort of you take a certain. Is there a formula saying, look, we want 10%, we want 20, we want 50, we need to what is it sort of is there the minimum investment size you're normally looking for, or it's still fairly random?
Well, look, there is so much similarity across the board with all these early stage sport tech companies. Once in a while you'll get some guy with really deep pockets, doesn't even need to raise money. Right. But generally speaking, they're doing family and friends money, and they're raising up to $500,000 that way. Right. Sometimes even $1 million. Then they're doing their first kind of seed round, and they're looking for 500,000 or even 250 or $1 million or a couple million. So our ticket size, we come in around 250 is our ticket size, and we're looking for 10 to 25% of the company, which at that early stage, can make sense. A board position and this advisory services agreement that binds us together for success.
Right. Okay, and so then the advisory part is they're paying a fee also back to the company. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's how if I understood it correctly, right?
And that was my innovation in this space, because everybody told me you can't do that. And I said, why not? Well, you can't do that because investors don't do that. And I said, well, why not? And they said, because they don't. And I said, well, why not? And so finally I just said, fuck it. Excuse me. We're just gonna do it. And I know what I'm talking about here, because I've been working with sport tech startups and they want to pay us to help them. So why would we not do that if it also de-risks our investment and helps them have more success?
Absolutely.
So it's not going to be for every company, but we're finding a lot of companies that want to do that are in this way, and it's working so far really well.
Yeah, I love this. Great, nice one. And in a perfect way as well to sort of getting to the finish line here. One lesson, and I know we talked about it at the very, very beginning, is the leadership lessons which you feel you've learned over the years. Working with some of those senior guys in the industry. If you would sort of use that as a sort of final point here to summarize and wrap it up. What's the big lessons you would share with your kids and or junior executives coming into the industry? What to pay attention to?
My son actually works for us now, so I have to be careful.
Yeah.
Marcus, the one thing that cuts through the world of sports, and it's obvious to say it, but it's not obvious at all to live it. And but the guys like Mark McCormick and Horst Dassler that got this industry started and had these incredible leadership skills, and Horst Dassler passed those down to Klaus and Jürgen, and they use those skills to build team marketing. And look at the results. And what do I mean by leadership? I mean bringing a small group of professionals together that have a high level of expertise in one way or another, and then forming a group that meets regularly and talks to each other, where everybody in the group knows exactly what's happening in the whole company.
Right.
We knew the financials, we knew the legal situation, we knew all of us knew everything about the Champions League every time we met, and had a common interest because of our profit sharing, participation, to make this company a success, and listening to every one of the group, and if somebody had the right idea, even though it wasn't their area, adopting that idea because it was right, what was best for the company.
Yeah, I like
and
that.
and coming into a management meeting and saying, listen, put your sponsorship sales hat outside the door now. Richard Worth, who eventually came and joined us, put your broadcast sales hat outside the door. Put on your Champions League hat now when you come into this room. This is not just about what you're doing. This is about the Champions League. What are we doing that's for the best of the Champions League? And it's reviewing your employees, every month, and who's performing well and which ones are not performing well and need to be gotten rid of after they've been given a chance. But there's nothing that kills an organization faster than a few bad employees that are not really motivated.
Right.
I was like a revolving door. I was the guy that, because I had the operations, I had when we had up to 100 people, I had people in my office every day. Craig, can I see you? I got a problem. Okay, come on in. What's your problem? They would tell me the problem, and I would say, look, before I answer you, I want to know, what do you think about your job? How's it going? And this kind of became a routine with me. And they would say, well, I love it. Fantastic. Yeah. I couldn't have a better job. I said, okay, fine. Let's discuss your problem. Yeah. And other people would say, well, it's okay. I'm getting along. It's all right. I say, what? Sorry, what? And you mean you can't tell me you love this job?
Right.
Well, I wouldn't say I love it. I like what I'm doing. But, well, you know what? You've got some problems here. That's not the problem.
There. Correct.
The problem is you don't love your job. And I can tell you there's 200 people that want your job, that will love your job. So why don't you do yourself a favor and me, turn around and go through that door and go on and get on with your life and find something that you love. Yeah. Find something that you love to do. Great because question. This is not just a job. If you're here just as a job, you're in the wrong place, my friend. So I was responsible for getting rid of a lot of people from Champions League. And over the years, as we developed that philosophy and lived it, obviously our hiring got a lot better and a lot less people left the company. Right. So it was really the early days where I had to do that a lot. And then it just kind of took care of itself after that.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great question. I think anyone who's listening should pick that up because, funny enough, I never maybe did it as consciously as you did it, but it's exactly the same question. I've always say to my guys as well. If this is not a job which you have a passion for, and if this is just another paycheck, you're in the wrong space. There are folks who will have that passion for it. And the other part about what you mentioned earlier about this sort of openness and transparency within let's call it the leadership team. I learned that from Tony Robbins. I went to one of his business mastery seminars, whatever, I'd say 15 years ago or more. And they were teaching the same thing that, you need to be, because like an entrepreneur, you don't necessarily always want to share with everyone how much money you're making and especially if you make lots of money, then everyone gets whatever, it's like, oh, I want more salaries and that. And they taught the same thing. It's like, transparency really grows the business and builds the sort of, ownership in a company as well, which was wasn't necessarily what they taught me at business school maybe. And so we started implementing as well, where similar, we had weekly meetings with the leadership team, and everyone would share everything, right? The finance guys would share whether we were making money, where we were having challenges, and really that grew the company similar to 100 people at one point in time, and I would credit that to in the same sense of what you said. So I think again that's a good lesson for anyone. That as much as your tendency maybe to keep things on your own, if you are the owner, if you are the main shareholder, but I think it's the opposite actually, which does the trick, right?
And the young people that I talk to all the time now about the industry and I just it's always, for me, it's always the same. If you love sports, you're passionate about it, you couldn't be luckier in your life than to get a job in sports. We're so lucky to work in this space. But as you go along, if you want to build a career out of it, you've got to identify for you the leaders that you believe in, and you've got to go make a glue between yourself and them, and picking your leaders, picking your mentors is going to be the most important decision you ever make, because it's those people that will determine how much you learn, how fast you can grow, the responsibilities that you're given, and to go back in my day, like I said, when I was at ISL, the best job in the world, and Klaus and Jürgen left, and I said, "Tell me where you're going, because I'm coming with you.
Right.
I don't care what you're doing. I know that you're going to work in sports, and I know you're the best in this industry,
right.
And I'm there with you."
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Very nice. And that is, great stories. And it's a perfect way to wrap it up here. So, Greg, thank you so much for your time. This was very, very, again, enlightening on so many levels. Great stories and I think some great lessons for everyone inside there. So thank you for it. A good evening there for you in California. And I hope we'll talk some more soon.
Marcus, thank you for your questions, your insights, your wisdom in this whole process. I really enjoyed doing this with you. So thank you.
Thank you.
And
yes.
I'll look forward to talking to you again when we have a chance soon.
Definitely. Thank you. Good night.
All the best.
Bye-bye.
The Sports Entrepreneurs by Marcus Luer podcasts are a collection of interviews and stories. All content in this podcast is the copyright of Marcus Luer. Reproduction and distribution of the presentation without written permission of the owner is prohibited. All rights reserved.